Welcome back to our Metaverse class at the MIT Media Lab. And we have our next lecture by Marco Tempest. Marco usually doesn't need big of an introduction because he's so well known with his work. He is a regular TED speaker. He has many fabulous TED sessions that you can see online. He is the director of the Magic Lab in New York City, but also he is a creative technologist at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He is an MIT Media Lab Director's Fellow alumni, and he also worked with Accenture on the extended reality. And I think there's a project called Woven Alpha that he's working on. So he's a widely known, well-achieved, super interesting person. I'm so happy to have him here in the class speak, and I'm curious what we will see. So, Marco, it's your session.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So great to be back at the Media Lab. So I prepared something super curated. I hope it's gonna work. It's gonna go about 10 minutes or so. And then we're gonna have some time for a conversation. So I'm gonna give this a go and see if this is gonna all work the way I have it planned. So, as you already heard, my name is Marco Tempest. I'm the founder of the Magic Lab in New York City and a consultant at Creative Technologist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You could say that I help organizations bring their technological stories to life. I work with augmented and virtual reality, gestural sensing, robotics, AI, and a whole host of interesting technologies to create experiences that are clear, memorable, and sometimes seemingly impossible. Now, for the past 4 years or so, as Valentin already mentioned, I was the extended reality lead consultant at Accenture. Accenture is one of the world's leading professional services companies. I helped Accenture build their extended reality practice at their own corporate Metaverse, an immersive collaboration platform that enables rapid prototyping and experimentation with digital twins. It's a tool to forward think interactions between companies and their customers. Now, one of those companies was Disney, and strangely enough, it's Disney that inspired the project I would like to share with you today. But before we get to that, I'd like to explain my own introduction to the Metaverse. So here we go. Hope this works. So I began my career as a techno-magician. Techno-magic was a term I used to describe the interaction between illusion and technology to create new and impossible experiences. So let me show you an example. First, we're going to need some light. So what you are seeing here is real. It's an illusion created by the tools of the magician. But if we add a layer of digital imagery, we create a hybrid between illusion and technology. Now, this augmented reality layer is not a simple overlay. It's actually reacting directly to my movements here in the room. And it is as live as this floating ball of light. So there is one reality here and another reality you're experiencing on the screen. It is this combination of technology and theatrical illusion that has fascinated me for most of my life. Now, you could say that magicians have always been early adopters of technology, secret adopters. They use new technologies in their performances before they become known to the public. And we can trace a path through the history of magic and see how emerging technologies have been covertly used to create illusions. These include the use of pneumatics and hydraulics by the magicians of ancient Greece, chemistry by the 16th century magicians posing as alchemists, electromagnetism used by the 19th century French magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, optics to create ghosts on the Victorian stage, wireless as a means of secretly transmitting information by vaudevillian mind readers, and the greatest illusion of all, cinema, pioneered by magician Georges Méliès. New technologies come along all the time, and the challenge for magicians is to find ways to use them before they become widely known by their audience. To stay ahead of the technology curve, I develop my own tools, and I collaborate with software programmers, designers, artists, engineers, students. Now, magic is a psychological process, an entertainment dependent on human connection, an entertainment that is best experienced live. So being stuck at home for the better part of the last 3 years, where we were all separated from one another, caused me to focus more on that shared virtual space that technologists call the Metaverse. And I've been able to use technology, both overt and covert, to create new forms of presentations with visualizations that make them more engaging and immersive. And this led to the project I like to share today. As I said, the inspiration came from Disney. More specifically, it was their streaming series, The Mandalorian. As you probably know, The Mandalorian showcased a new production technology called the volume. It enabled cinematographers to place actors into synthetic scenery in real time. It's an incredible technology, and it's also huge in scale and very expensive. So I wondered whether it was possible to build something along the lines of the volume, a tool that would enable me to give presentations at an epic scale, and yet be small enough to travel with me, small enough to fit inside a carry-on. So this is it. I call it the Metaverse in a carry-on. And you've been watching it in action for the past few minutes. Everything you see on the screen is being generated in real time. And it all fits inside this case. A small green screen, a laptop computer, a mobile headset, the camera and the sensor, and the free Unreal Engine software. And it can be set up in the smallest of places, my living room, hotel rooms, and even parking lots. And with it, I can invite anyone to enter imagine experiences that feel real. So, we got our case. Where shall we go? How about a trip to an imagined space station in low Earth orbit as a space tourist, to learn about the commercialization of space and the new space economy. I always wanted to try one of these Apollo mission spacesuits out there. Or we can invite audience members to take a virtual field trip to Mars. Now, this here isn't an artist's impression. This 3D landscape is generated from photographic images that NASA's Curiosity rover sent back to Earth. Audience members can join in virtual reality or via a live broadcast, and we can give people an experience that truly connects them with the scientific community. We can share the adventures and discoveries of science in new and breathtaking ways, and we can shrink that gulf that sometimes separates ideas from understanding. Now, at the corporate level, the metaverse is already taking shape. Digital spaces are mimicking the real world, creating experiences that will be powered by digital currency and digital assets that can be exchanged between digital identities. The business and corporate world, undoubtedly spurred on by the pandemic, is seeking virtual spaces in which to share knowledge, experience, and even to work. Now, what a setup like this makes possible is that anyone can participate in the metaverse. They can share, create, and expand and change our environments, and generate virtual spaces in which to meet and blend the simulated and the real in new and exciting ways. Now I'd like to show you another example. And in this demonstration, I'm going to try to blur the line between what is incredibly real and incredibly not. So let's give this a try. Arthur C. Clarke's dictum that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic is well known. But it is also true that any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. And the metaverse is the perfect place to prototype new technologies, even if they do not yet exist. This drone, for example. Hey, jump. Now, there you go. An unknown technology to create an illusion. Hey. For you, the technology is not a mystery. Advanced algorithms allow autonomous machines to fly in close relation, aware of each other, aware of me. Mathematics that can be mistaken for intelligence, and intelligence for personality. Machines that appear to be alive. Now, does such a thing exist? In fact, this is another example of using illusion to render our imagination. An illusion that takes place in our mind. Technology plus magic gives us a glimpse into the future. Oh, I think they said hello. Thank you, guys. Time to go home. All right, I'm glad that worked modestly well. I have a few closing remarks to wrap this up, and then we can have a conversation. So here I go. When I first built the metaverse in a carry-on, some of my friends asked me what it was for. What was I trying to achieve? Well, for that we have to go back to the creation of the metaverse. The metaverse was not solely a product of technology or commerce. It came from the imagination of artists. It was the vision of science fiction writer Neil Stephenson who coined the term metaverse in his novel Snow Crash. And there is a history of science fiction writers and other artists who have conjured future technologies from their imagination. And we have seen how the imagination of users have transformed technologies beyond the dreams of those who designed them. It is because of these creative thinkers that these technology platforms have also transformed our lives. Now, this experiment of mine was designed to stimulate the imagination. It was created using free and readily available tools that are already being used by many creative people around the world. These type of tools enable anyone to participate and showcase their vision of how virtual spaces can transform the way we think about work, learning, and collaboration. Today was a random sampling of what can be accomplished inside the metaverse. And I'm super excited on what comes next, that journey that lays ahead. As for me, I will bring along my small carry-on that is filled with astonishing possibilities. Thank you very much. And that's what I had to start this off.
Wow. I'm speechless. And I got text messages. Is this real? Is this real? So well achieved the result of this. Marco, can you jump in any of these scenes and actually talk to us outside of your talk track? because it's so real that you can do what you just did.
Okay, so maybe I start with explaining a little bit more in detail how the setup works here. That might make sense. So I gonna go and actually click a few buttons for you guys. So I have this like creepy stand-in I gonna put into the frame so I can actually show you how that would integrate. So give me a moment. This is my boss. Sorry. I wasn't prepared for that otherwise. Sorry. So this is to set things up. Let me get my glasses. So I have a small laptop. It's a gaming laptop which runs a piece of software which is called Xymetry. And Xymetry enables me to take a green screen in, crop it, and then create a chroma key, and then put that inside a scene. And I have created a kind of a playlist editor where I can go from scene to scene. So let me quickly turn off the background. So here we see him inside a scene, and I can switch the environments around him. So I can, for example, switch to the space station. So it's inside the space station now, and I have different cameras I can switch to, and these cameras have different camera passes. So I can have like animated cameras which move around. So we're on the space station now, or I can go to the Mars environment, quickly switch to Mars. And then again, I have different cameras I can switch to. And then I created a suite of special effects like the ambers which you saw when I made the floating lights. I can turn lights on and off. Let me quickly go back to my main stage. So in here I can turn off lights and I can turn them back on and so on. And so everything is happening on my laptop in real time. I use a little playlist editor where I have, thank you, where I send OSC messages inside the Xymetry software. And the Xymetry is kind of a middleware which helps control Unreal Engine. And maybe let me switch back so you guys see me in a better position. About like that. All right. Any questions while I move things around?
I guess I have a question, quick one on top of that. So it looks like the way that you've set it up. Oh, and again, thank you for an amazing talk. This is very fascinating stuff, and I love the combination. It seems like really combining the magic with the storytelling is really what gets a lot of things together. That's one of the things I learned from the Void experience, when actually using like misdirection magic really makes everything more alive. I was wondering, so it looked like you had all the camera passes and everything kind of preset ahead of time when you were doing it. Have you experimented, like, do you set those just in Unreal itself, or do you actually use any like tracking stuff so that you can maybe have like a controller or something in front of you move the camera around as you kind of like block things out? Have you experimented with stuff like that?
So the space I'm currently in my studio, or my little magic lab in Switzerland, in my basement, I have a 3-camera setup, and one of the cameras is tracked. However, for this particular talk, I decided to just use a stationary camera, like a 4K webcam, sort of. So this, the camera you're currently seeing is not tracked. It's virtually moved inside Unreal. And the reason I did so is because in an ideal world, this talk would inspire young talent which doesn't have access to tracked cameras and fancy rigs to give this a go and explore and start exploring. So I try to do the simplest possible setup for this.
That makes sense. And kind of like on that, so
kind of gap, the biggest gap between cost and results, kind of like.
And so are you able to kind of maybe use like controllers, like VR controllers, because it looked like there was a headset as part of the like kit. Are you able to maybe use the controllers to control the virtual cameras themselves, or do you kind of control the virtual cameras just through Unreal ahead of time and just kind of have that set?
So
because you could potentially use like the controller as the virtual.
to control the camera. So there are tools for this where you can kind of create, like for virtual filmmaking, where you use a motion track sensor or a controller or a RealSense device or an iPad if you work with Unreal. There's an app for that to do your virtual camera passes, and then you can record them and play them back. That's my train of thought. Oh yeah, the headset. The reason I have a headset is I want to make sure that the environment I make work well on mobile. So you could run a second instance of this on a second laptop, and then have a small kind of collaborative experience. So you could have like maximum of 12 people inside your set, and they see my little cutout inside the set, like a 2D 2.5D hologram, and they can actually explore the set and see it in true 3D. It's the thing I showed on Mars, where it's this kind of, you can broadcast it, what I did in the talk now, or you can create an environment where people can join. However, the joining flattens out fairly quickly. That doesn't scale very well, like the state synchronization and the geometry you need to have avatars. If you have like a dozen people in a set, that can become quite taxing, especially on mobile devices.
That makes sense. Thank you. Very inspiring.
Hi, Marco. Super inspiring talk. I was the person that was texting about it, and I was like, is this even real? How do we get to watch this for free? I'm curious to learn about your journey from being, an actual magician and then adding technology into your process. And do you still do you like the old school magic tricks? And if so, have you tried to combine some of the mixed reality stuff into your practice?
So the way I came from, so I started with magic. My background is truly as like kind of a stage magician, but I always experimented with interactive tech or emerging tech. I always seeked out collaborations with engineers which were much better than I am. As a matter of fact, a lot of my early work, which was interactive, I collaborated with Zach Lieberman, which is at the Media Lab. He was kind of the person who opened the door to open frameworks where you could do things before all these incredible tools became available, which we have right now. So I used to be a magician, exploring technology and kind of telling stories of the future within my performances. And through a really lucky coincidence, somebody seeked me out. A former Media Lab professor seeked me out and said, "Hey, Marco, really, I think what you're doing would be of great use in industry. Like, we're always struggling to make these high fidelity prototypes, these very robust user experiences early on in product development or in product discovery. A lot of the problems which we find in engineering are actually liberal arts problems, design problems, and not so much engineering problems. And you could contribute to that. So why don't you come to the Media Lab where we do things like that?" And so I was a director's fellow. This was quite a few years ago at the Media Lab. And that meant kind of I got access to the Media Lab. Like, I was able to bring kind of my world into the Media Lab and a little bit of the Media Lab out into the world. And I started collaborating with students and faculty. We did a performance where we used a big robot and interacted with a robot and made it do things which seemed kind of impossible, like kind of pre-visualizing human-robot interaction. And one thing led to another from that. There was like, as I started doing this and had less and less of an imposter syndrome, being in a not showbiz environment, more and more opportunities started popping up. And so for the last 5 years, I've been at Accenture, working in a fantastic environment, in an innovation lab, helping to build this extended reality practice. So doing AR and VR and gestural sensing and all of that, and actually creating product and go-to-market strategies for the product and so on, which was a fantastic experience. And so these days I'm in Tokyo. I mean, right now I'm in Switzerland for a short vacation, but these days I'm in Tokyo working at Woven City. That's a a futuristic city which is going to be built at the base of Mount Fuji. It's kind of a test course for mobility of people and data and goods, where Toyota tries to kind of figure out how that will all come together. And so I'm helping there with similar topics like prototyping and creating user experiences. You could say that the type of user experiences that magicians create are very much always field tested. We field test every time we try something, and they're usually very robust, because if they fall apart, then the magic trick is exposed. And also they need to be delightful, right? Kind of, although in a magic trick you're very limited to what you can do as an audience member. Pick a card, any card. That doesn't really mean you can pick any card. Like, you might be much more constrained than you think. But to kind of hide the current inabilities of software to do everything we want it to do, or technology to do everything we want it to do, and to find that sweet path or that sweet spot through it to create a delightful user experiences. I think that's something which is very common when you're a magician, to have this kind of mindset of thinking about things.
We have another question from Dryden. Maybe just turn on your camera, and
yeah,
there you are.
Great. Yeah, it was exciting talk. I was just curious, you had one moment there where you had, I think it was a drone. Was it a drone physically in your space that you were interacting with? And I just saw that this is one of your projects. I was wondering if you could speak more about that moment and this work. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is a really good example of kind of doing something which is barely possible, and then enhancing it with kind of a little bit of magic. So the first drone was a real drone, which flew in here and did the flip. But the space in my basement is just too small for a drone swarm. So I usually do these drone swarm performances on big stages where I have an indoor positioning system. This drone was pretty much blind because it just doesn't fit into this small space. So I augmented it with virtual drones. But for the experience of the audience, it doesn't really matter, I think, if like how many of the drones are real or not, to make that point about autonomous machines which we anthropomorphize and which we think might be alive. So that's kind of a very good example of like magic and tech coming together to pre-visualize or visualize something which might be hard to achieve otherwise, or is not yet quite possible, but might be possible, just around the corner.
And so I'm not sure if can you hear me? Oh yeah. I was curious about you were kind of mentioning like this shift during the last 3 years about being virtual. And it's great to see that you're making these kind of tools more open and available to other people. But I was also just curious if you were doing performances specifically on Zoom during the past 3 years, and I assume that's part of the catalyst of you developing this project. But I was just wondering, like kind of in reference to this, like having the physical and then augmented by the virtual, like if there was anything that you discovered in that process of shifting into a completely virtual platform or experience rather than doing it live physically.
Yeah, so like things get quite reduced when you're virtual. Like kind of like there is I think nothing beats sitting in a room with people and kind of feeling how other people around you get excited, and like collectively getting excited about a talk as a presenter on stage, or a spectacle happening in front of you. So they're devices for being a Zoom magician or giving a presentation on Zoom, where typically I would probably interact much more in such a performance with the audience, right? I would ask you guys questions, and there would be something interactive where you can touch the screen and so on. So for a while I did these kind of performances, but then it felt like it might be just also good to use this time to think about what's next, and to kind of upskill a little bit on the tools which are just appearing on the horizon. Right? And so when I saw The Mandalorian and the technology which was put into that, which looked so absolutely incredible, but also made me question if that would ever scale to kind of, if indie movies or student projects could benefit of that. I really set out to figure out how to make the smallest possible version of that and then bring it onto a stage. So now, these days I literally travel with this kind of a setup, and I put it on a stage and do it in front of a live audience, which is so much more fun and so much more interactive.
Kathy was sending me a message like, oh no, he's unveiling his magic trick. No, it's like the big no-go of a magician. But so this is really interesting, that you show us the magic trick, but then you show us how you've done the magic trick, and that you are actually interested to teach the magic trick. And because it sounds like it's even a bigger value for you in this metaverse environment to teach about this magic trick that is the metaverse. So I'm curious what you think about that line of thought.
Yes. So in my creative practice, about 10 years ago, I kind of switched gears where it suddenly started not so much being about like, hey, look, I fooled you, and was more like, I just want to show my audience what I'm super excited about and what delights me. And so actually, less and less tricks are happening in my work, like over these years. So like today, there was like half a magic trick with that floating light, right? So, and so, but I think that's for me. How should I say this? It's like it's a quality of life improvement for me, because if you're a magician, although it's a wonderful art, and I enjoy watching magic, for the magician himself, he lives in these two realities. It's like you're constantly observing your audience and kind of looking for moment like situations you can exploit to delight, but still you're much more separated from your audience. And then the conversation you have after your performances is always, how did you do it? So you live in this endless loop of having this thing you're not allowed to say how it's done, and having all this like hokey, I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you, this kind of like these kind of nonsense conversations. So by taking the magic out of my magic, I'm now able to have completely different conversations and and can talk about the technology or talk about art and so on, because it's not dominating the conversation.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like you've put all this effort into this technology. You show the magic trick. It's just a peak of the iceberg, but there's so much going on. And you had the moment where it was like exploding out of you. Like, I actually also want to tell you about how it's done, because it's equally cool, kind of.
Yeah. And so, and I think it's cool to kind of have the latest technology in at your fingertips and know how to shape it into make it do something it might not be meant to do quite yet, right? That's what you're doing at the Media Lab. Like you have all these emerging tech and all these new tools and all these trends, these emerging trends, and your job at the essence is to take all that and express something new with it. And so that's more fun than fooling somebody to me these days, really.
That's really interesting to hear. I want to give some space for other questions. There's some chats going on. If you want to participate in the conversation, and just start your camera or just your microphone and just join. So there's an open conversation.
Well, I just want to comment that I thought that, I appreciate your talking about, giving away the magic trick, because that was always taboo. But But in your case, it really is, and I think in many cases, it's about the story that you want to tell, and your stories aren't dependent on the technology, but in a way, the technology, or at least the magic of the technology, is dependent on the story, and you tell a very special story. And I think the gift of teaching young people or other generations about the way you do this is actually not necessarily giving it away, but it's enabling the next generation of magicians and storytellers and innovators. Honestly, I think it's another way into innovation, which is super interesting.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, I thought a lot about storytelling and what parts of this can help people who are not magicians or just storytellers, right? So, and it seems like that story is a really important component in any type of innovation. You can, like, one of the key identifiers of like great innovation teams is that they share a common story, that they have something which kind of brings them on board and guides them through that process. At JPL, at NASA, we call it a compelling mission narrative. We don't call it storytelling, but it's the same thing. So early on in the process, you can kind of bind team members together. They all know what it is about if you have a very concise story, and then the story helps with funding, helps with understanding. So having a clear story, a why to the what, maybe with a heroic moment in it, that's always a really great thing to have. And then, of course, people don't remember data, they remember stories, right? So it's like if you can tell a wonderful story, or in other words, give a wonderful experience to people, then they will go out and the story will spread, right? They might even embellish your story and say, maybe somebody tomorrow will say, well, he had all these drones and half of them were real and half of them were not. And like, so that happens usually with, if people have a great experience when they see a presentation or a magician or a product launch, right? They go out and embellish it a little bit. And that's sometimes not a bad thing.
It really augments the experience, sort of if we take it back to our previous speaker, who was really about experience, and also the Hiroshi's work, right, which is so much about sort of taking data and turning it into a real experience. It's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am muted the whole time. I was asking if there are any more questions. Anyone else wants to join the conversation? Just do it. It's really interesting the way that you sit in front of us in this form factor of a picture that reminds me of like an old camera with the viewfinder in the middle.
Oh.
And you're like in a photo box right now.
So the reason it's like this is I flip the camera sideways, so I have more pixels, so I can zoom in and out. So the real view of the camera is sideways, right? So I get more pixels when I stand in the set. So key myself out. Bad key.
So when we talked like we had a conversation before you came on to talk here, we started to talk a little bit about the physical and the digital, like the work that you now have in front of you about the physical cities and so on. How do you see the magic that you build, the virtual experiences and the stories that you guide lead into the real world? It's kind of, when I started in this field, I was listening a lot to the Tron soundtrack, because this is kind of a really interesting story where this kind of idea of transitioning in from the virtual into the physical happened. But we're kind of on a really interesting moment where some of these things happen more than we might can eat right now, that we can consume right now.
Yeah, it's so in a way, it's almost like super high fidelity prototyping without really making the super high fidelity prototype. Like I saw, like using what you currently have for your, let's call it design fiction, kind of like you use AR or VR to prototype and to test these user experiences before you actually build the physical product or experience. It's a very compelling use case, right? So I think if I'm hard pressed to find something that people could do every day in VR, right? I don't know of a company which uses VR every day, all day long for something like. So there's this premise that there's this enterprise metaverse or this corporate metaverse where you can do all these things, and usually these are the things which are compelling to me are these days are where you can work on prototyping something, and then you can take a handful of people into an experience like once. So hopefully you have a good pipeline where you can put this together very quickly and give them an experience and kind of have them approve the next step or critique it. And then you go back to the drawing board, and then you might make a more high definition or a high fidelity experience, or you tweak it. And then, so you have these few steps before you cut metal or make the building or whatnot. So this is super compelling. And so usually a lot of times these kind of experiences end with kind of the physical thing, or with the like having the cat data inside virtual reality. What I like to bring to that is, you might have the birds overhead, and there's a very nice onboarding experience, or there's a virtual guide who walks you around, or there's a simulation of true interactivity where it feels like you can go anywhere in that building, but you're like carefully notched to where we actually created the technology, the geometry, so you can actually explore it. It's a little bit like creating a video game where you cannot create every possibility, but it means it should feel like everything is built out and you can go anywhere you want. So it's this kind of very controlled user experiences, which then which might just help the teams I work with to get the next funding round or get the approval to actually build that thing. So, so in a pragmatic way to look at it, that's kind of a place where this can become super useful, where the virtual can become the real.
What you just said reminds me a little bit when I said I was listening to the Tron soundtrack. It is because you need to put yourself in a mindset where there is a vision or there is a story that lifts up your spirit in such a way that you allow yourself to think in a certain way and then take down a path. And I think that's maybe what you just said, when you support the funding of something or so, it is about to lift everyone's spirit into a certain direction and to be able to move along that line, to synchronize about a vision and move forward. So that might be, it's such an important work to kickstart anything, I guess.
I think I kind of compare it to like I always was a stage magician, so I was never good at walking around with a deck of cards like a close-up magician. And I love to be on stage because the theater is like the perfect place. You control the light, you can control the sound, you can turn the lights off, put everybody in darkness. You have all the attention of your audience once they're in a theater. It's a really incredible platform. to deliver a story or to make people feel something, right? So in a sense, a virtual reality headset is a very inexpensive way to do that. You know, it's like for a few $100s, you have a very similar setup like a full-on theater, which costs, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to move something into a big Broadway theater. You put a headset onto somebody, you control sound and light, they're fully immersed, you can guide them through your story. It's a wonderful medium. And so thinking about these experiences in a kind of storytelling or theatrical way, I think is a very good starting point for most of these experiences, even if it's a very simple industrial application. Like there, with a little bit of delight, you can really kind of open people up to a true experience.
I think maybe
that's
unrelated.
Okay, so just like one, like I think that's why companies like Meta like bets the house on that. Like kind of like some people have these kind of experiences. They talk about presence and whatnot. Like it can be really super powerful, right? Especially for first-time users. If they have a great experience, it can be really great. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, what came to my mind, you know, it's like when you are a rock star and you know the experience when you give a TED talk, you have this big audience in front of you and they all give you all the energy, like, wow, you know, you hear all these sounds. And then probably to get back to this point probably gets harder and harder, or it's like you always have to deliver something in order to get that back. It's like probably every musician that's in a stage has that. So it's kind of like an interesting, what you said, you put the headset on and then you have the audience. So what if you have this experience of, you know, you put the headset on and you can perform something and you have an artificial audience that gives you that feeling whenever you need.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like in the last conversation, it's what you guys talked about. It's like and what Hiroshi said, right? Kind of like the interpersonal communication. Or it's like there are also so many limitations, right? But I think that's fine. Like kind of, I think your job at the Media Lab is to figure out what's possible, right? Or what that could lead to, right? And not go down the too many wrong paths too deep, right? Kind of. So, but I think there's just so much experimentation which can still be done. We know all the limitations. People get dizzy. They have a hard time understanding what to do with the controllers. They have a hard time setting it up or getting on Wi-Fi. And then you have these comic avatars and but still these are totally magical tools, right? Kind of there's so much still which can be done with it. I mean, I just did you know, like with a laptop and the webcam, kind of like you can tell a quite compelling story.
And it's so interesting that you open it up in a way, because you give people the hand to say, come into this world as well and be a creator. I remember before, not maybe 2 or 3 years before I came to the Media Lab myself as a student back in time, it was like you had all of the electronic devices around you and games and so on, and it all felt like these closed worlds so far away. You know, how do you make circuit boards? How do you build all of these things that looks like these perfect objects that are, who knows, done by who? And then when you start learning how this world works and these things fall apart in the magic, basically, you learn the magic trick of building the circuit boards for these systems. You learn a new way of expression and you learn how to participate in that world that surrounds us. And this world becomes more and more virtual and more in this way that we and everyone out there needs to learn how to build and create this world. So it's so interesting that you showed this like perfect magic trick where you sit there like, wow, what the heck is going on here? That's crazy. but then you unveil it to us and you give us the hand to participate and join and learn about that, so that that others can express themselves as well. I think that's by itself a really, really interesting story or important story that you tell. Not through the story you tell, but through the action.
Well, thank you. Like, I think it's really important that we participate, like that everybody participates, like kind of like it's all open, it's all accessible, you know. It's like it's almost free. Like, so it's a wonderful time to contribute and to quite possibly have some sort of influence on the trajectory of these kind of technologies. Like, I think it's important to have representation, not necessarily by 57-year-old magicians, but like you know, by large communities of students and artists. And so the tools are out there now. If that stuff would have been around when I was a little younger, I would not have been able to sleep at night. There's just so much which can be experimented with right now.
I think, just to add on what Valentin was saying, that I think you showed us this perfect show, but there's so much work that's been put behind this magic to make it happen. But you don't overwhelm people with all the digits, gadgets, and stuff. And I think that's in my interpretation, the essence of a magic is you only reveal the necessary information and you show your true being in front of the camera instead of having an avatar. I feel like that's one very distinguishing factor that really wowed me compared to all the other virtual shows I've seen. Something about seeing your physical presence just makes it even more magical. Surprisingly, even the tech in comparison is, like you said, is very simple, like a webcam. Kind of on that note, I'm curious if you have any advice, or just coming from your own experience, when you try to design a presentation or a story or magic, what is your typical approach? Like, do you start from the end effect that you want to share with people, and how does that lead to, okay, choosing what kind of technology you want to use to make it happen? If you could maybe give some like quick short examples of what you have done. Yeah.
So I typically work in kind of two streams. One is the kind of sandboxing of the technology and kind of starting to understand what it can do and what it cannot do, while at the same time kind of starting to, based on that, inform what the story could be I could tell with this tech, right? And then the last thing you want to do is have this beautiful thing and then find out that it's just not quite possible yet, like being too naive about or ignorant about the technology. So there's almost no other way than doing it hands-on, like to actually sandbox all these things. Like, it's like, could I track my hands? There's this thing called MediaPipe. Great, you know, would it actually be performant enough in this little sensor in the Oak D, which I'm using here? So I need to test this out before I decide I'm going to have a floating light with sparkles around it, which follow it, and put that into my story. So it's these parallel tracks, which usually go on for quite a while. And then another filter I add to that is it still clear enough for the audience to understand what's going on? Kind of, they can understand like a green screen and a game engine, you know. And then so maybe I leave the thing where I wanted to have a projector and have a volumetric capture and this and that. So like sometimes it's kind of reducing, so it becomes for clarity is kind of a filter I usually apply. And then before I do the kind of final production. And then particularly in the kind of things I do, they need to be very robust. Like if the premise is I have a metaverse in my carry-on and I travel somewhere, then there's also this, can I set it up quickly? Is it reliable? I just came from an airplane like an hour and a half before this started. I flew in from Los Angeles and I literally had this thing in my carry-on and wasn't in Switzerland for 5 months, and just quickly set it up here in the basement. So that, like, that hardening at the end is also very important. So yeah, that a little bit of recipe. I'm not sure if that helps you, but I think the most important thing is not to be ignorant about the technology or just believe the spec sheet when you read about a new product. You have to sandbox with it. You have to play with it, and that also leads to ideas, right? Kind of so, and then not to wait too long with the story development as well. I kind of keep the two things informing each other as you move forward.
Oh, it's unbelievable that you just set it up an hour and a half before this talk from an airplane, literally, and carry on.
Yeah, so it took longer to put it together, but like this kind of there's literally a piece of I built something into the software which allows me to, when it's set up, hit the button, stand in front of it for 10 seconds, and then be able to walk back to the controls to check my have my recorded audio levels. The footage is recorded, and now it replaces the live camera with that recorded footage, so I can set the keying and the tone mapping and the audio levels and all of this. So it's literally designed that if somebody says, yeah, you can come on the stage and do this for us, but we only have 5 minutes for you to set it up, that I can actually do it by myself and just have an audio and the video cable I can hand over to the house. So it has this kind of show control, kind of pre-show choreography, which I go through to make it quick and frictionless. And so I can do it by myself. That's the other thing.
Wonderful.
Was that too braggy? I was so sorry.
No, it's wonderful to hear like how much you've like how I think it sounds simple to people, but I know so much work probably went behind to making sure everything works seamlessly, and it's all for the moment when you're on stage, right? To bring that to people in a perfect sense. So we really appreciate it.
It's also interesting when you think about what you can do with the game engine and the green screen, because it looked so bombastic. You know, when you started your presentation, it was like, whoa, what just happened? And it all happens with this real-time game engine. So it's just fantastic how also that technology augments you, how it really pushes forward.
I mean, I'm such a fan of this new tech. It's just so incredible. And I think what Epic is doing is just like, it's amazing. It's just like how the access they give, the training they have, the communities they have. There's really, well, there are tens of thousands of kids who are now deploying their own metaverses into Fortnite, right? And will be able to revenue share in what they do. It's like with Epic. I think it's totally amazing. Like the access to the tools, and if you're super nerdy, you can get the latest version, you know, on GitHub, right, and build it yourself. It's just so open and so accessible and so transparent. It's super magical to have access to something like that.
Thank you that we had access to you in this class. What a wonderful.
This was so great. I really miss my time at the Media Lab. You guys are just so fortunate that you can be there, and yeah.
Well, we hope we can have you again at the Media Lab.
In person someday, or in a 2.5D person, in like half virtual, half in real. Something like
terrific.
Okay, thank you so much, Marco.